Okay, let's go ahead and get started here. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the What to Know Before You Buy a 3D Printer webinar. Hope your Wednesday's going well and that your Thursday and your Friday go even better. Before I kick this off, just to give you a little insight into the topic, a few of us on the 3D printing team had met, kind of kicking around what content we wanted to deliver to you for this webinar. And it turns out that we have been here, we're on calls all day, every day with interested buyers that want to evaluate the Markforged 3D printing technology. And it turns out that all of us run into the same exact, not only questions, but really have to kind of set our interested buyers on the right path so that they can properly evaluate our technology. So we thought this would be a great topic to cover today. And before I jump into what it is that you do need to know before you buy a 3D printer, I'd like to introduce several members of the Markforged additive manufacturing team that will be joining in or helping out with the conversation today. Starting with myself, my name's Jordan Swan. I'm based out of Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a Markforged 3D printing solution specialist for all of the southeastern United States. We have Travis Bates, our 3D printing technician, who's based out of Dallas, Texas, that will be auditing the questions section of GoToMeeting. Amelia Parada is my counterpart for all the way from Austin, Texas to Arizona. So the sort of Southwest 3D printing solutions specialist. Then next we have China Penne. She is our inside sales specialist just outside of Seattle, Washington. You'll be hearing from both Amelia and China later on. And then, of course, last but not least, Kyle Norman, our applications expert, who will be taking the lead on the questions and answers section of today's webinar. You are welcome to sort of send your questions as they come up, as we do have people auditing those questions. But we will do a formal Q&A session where if you have the question, there's a good chance that someone else out there might have that question. So we'd love to kind of publicly go through those questions if you can save them to the end. But if you can't, no problem. Send them as they come. So MLC CAD Systems has been serving our manufacturing and engineering customer base for almost 40 years now. And the reason that MLC has been so successful is that we have strategically aligned ourselves with only the best technologies and tools that we know are going to make you successful. We can take you all the way from art to part, starting with our SolidWorks suite of products. If you didn't know it, SolidWorks is so much more than just 3D CAD. Everything from project data management to design automation, electrical, you name it, SolidWorks has the solution. Markforged for all of your additive manufacturing needs. That's why everyone joined in today, to learn a little bit about Markforged. We now know that Markforged has the largest 3D printing applications engineering install base in the world. Similarly, Mastercam for your subtractive is the most widely used CAM software in the world for CNC machines. So if you haven't been there in a while, go ahead and check out our website, get to know our solutions, and we definitely look forward to not only earning your business, but just making you extremely successful at the engineering and manufacturing that you're doing. All right, so a quick plan of attack for today's webinar. I'll go ahead and kick things off with setting the tone early, the sort of mindset that you need to be in as you explore additive technologies. Then I'll pass things over to Amelia Parada in Texas to go through the Markforged platform. She'll also chat with you a little bit about materials as it relates to 3D printing. And then last, China Penne from Washington is going to join in on the conversation. She's our inside sales specialist, as I already mentioned. She's on the phone chatting with people all day, every day, and is quite familiar with the common 3D printing hiccups that we feel you should avoid. Learn from other people's mistakes. So let's kind of talk about setting the tone early. In the way I want to kind of frame this conversation is that there are certain questions that you should really be asking as you start to investigate 3D printing. And you can certainly go the right way where 3D printing is successful and scalable, and you can go the wrong way where you try to adopt some sort of 3D printing and it's an absolute failure and feels as if it was a waste of time. So that's why it's important to set the tone early. And to start this portion of the webinar out, I want to talk a little bit about investing in capital equipment. Some of the nuances that go into it, and some considerations that you should have as you look into 3D printing technologies. And then next, proving that the technology works. So we can equate the acquisition of capital equipment to the consumers, an average consumer purchasing a house, purchasing an automobile. These are the largest expenses that they're going to incur within their lifetime. Likewise, a manufacturer's largest expenses that it's going to incur is its capital equipment. So before they make a purchase, they really want to know how they can prove that the technology is going to work. And I want to address that. Let's look at some words of wisdom here. If you need a machine and don't buy it, then you'll ultimately find that you've paid for that machine and you don't have it. These are words straight from Henry Ford. And what Ford was trying to get at boils down to inefficiency. It's inefficiency that puts your project behind schedule. It's inefficiency that hinders your company from growing. And it's inefficiencies that ultimately eat away from your profits. So if you critically examine your inefficiencies, you're going to find that it's cost you just as much, if not more, than if you would have bought a 3D printer to address those inefficiencies. So why not go ahead and just buy that 3D printer since you're already paying for it anyways? So to play the devil's advocate on myself a little bit here, you may ask, well, how am I to know if a Markforged 3D printer is actually going to address my inefficiencies? And I am going to, by the end of my portion of this webinar, give you the answer to how you can figure out that the Markforged technology is right for addressing your inefficiencies, because it might not be, to be completely honest, and we don't want you purchasing one of these machines if it's not going to address it. But before I get there, a much sort of easier answer to how we know that 3D printing can address our inefficiencies is the incredible growth within additive manufacturing. Over the course of the past 5 to 7 years, we've observed an upward trending trajectory, and we don't see that deviating whatsoever. Additive is expected to be a $40 billion industry by the year 2024. That's just 4 years from now. And that was, I think, the Wohlers report, their model of where additive will be in 2024. There are other models out there. Some say 30 billion, some say 100 billion, but I feel that they were at a nice median that captures what we're going to observe. And the fact is that we already have the customers with the results right now that are using the Markforged technology. It's a mature product. And you definitely aren't going to be a pioneer if you invest in Markforged technology. So we did a couple webinars in the past month or so. One of them was the future of additive now, which does a really great job of just sharing the capabilities of the Markforged technology, as well as highlighting how our customers are using their 3D printers to become more efficient. We also, just a couple weeks ago, did a webinar on how additive manufacturing is responding to COVID-19, the past, present, and future. Really interesting webinar, but my favorite portion of it was when we interviewed some customers that are using the technology. So check both of those webinars out. Head to MLC CAD Systems YouTube channel. We're going to share the link to these webinars at the end of today's webinar so that you can get there or save them for later on. And while you're at our YouTube channel, please subscribe. We've got a channel that's jam-packed, full of great content, and we're always rolling out something new. So that way, when something else is added to our channel, you get a notification. If it applies to you, you can check it out. So to get today's setting the tone early conversation started, I want to look to the Iceberg Effect, which is really a sort of useful phenomena, if you will, to look at anytime you're dealing with capital equipment investments. And what the Iceberg Effect addresses is that when we purchase a piece of capital equipment, we are only really absorbing the cost of the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. So once we paid for it, everything below the water surface are those sort of hidden costs or costs that we didn't realize we were going to incur. So to properly set the tone early, you really want to account for those, whether they be materials or maintenance costs. For example, I was working with a manufacturer that wanted to invest in the Markforged technology, but they had one obstacle, and that was that they'd already been using some other 3D printing technology for the past 6 years that they really weren't happy with, mainly because it wasn't outputting the types of parts that they were really looking to get, and that their materials were so expensive that they had come to the decision that it was just better for them to bring in Markforged instead. But they didn't want to just throw this machine away. So I tried to help them place the technology with an educational institute as a donation. That way they get a write-off and they don't feel so bad displacing this $100,000+ machine. And so I engaged with this educational institution, and they wanted nothing to do with this $100,000+ machine that I thought was going to be, a nice free gift for them to make use of. But they'd already been through this, and they knew that the materials were so expensive. In fact, the last donation they accepted, it took them tens of thousands of dollars just to get the machine up and running after moving it from one location to another. But then the materials were so expensive that they couldn't keep the machine going on a regular basis. And this particular technology, when it sat idle, needed maintenance. So they were just incurring all these high costs. And as you investigate 3D printing, I highly encourage you to look further into the price tag of acquiring that machine. And that the same goes with Markforged technology. And to address that head on, I think our materials are very competitive in the marketplace, one. And then second, your maintenance expenses are minimal to non-existent. I mean, of course you're going to go through materials. Print nozzles, Bowden tubes are kind of the extent of your wear and tear replacement items, and we're talking $50-100 to keep these machines going. So unlike many of the other 3D printing technologies, I think you really do capture what your biggest expense is going to be when you make that initial investment. So what I want to do is encourage you to become a deep water explorer and check out all of the iceberg that you cannot see prior to making a capital investment. And so another common sort of response I get to individuals that are hesitant in making a large capital investment is that, hey, I know how we can avoid getting underwater with some machine. Just buy something really cheap, and we can just learn on that, sort of see how that cheap investment goes before we make a more substantial investment that requires us to make a business case and achieve some sort of ROI within a reasonable amount of time. And I want to go ahead and take a firm position today as you listen in and say that buying a cheap hobbyist printer to learn on is the wrong move. And here in this slide, the Actual Advice Mallard agrees with me. Actual Advice Mallard was made famous on Reddit. Go ahead and Google him. He's got some really great common sense advice to get you through life. And this is just one of them. And so let's address why you may not really be able to afford to buy this cheap printer, and you're kind of the time and labor. We don't want you to get into the business of having to maintain a 3D printer. If you can't start your 3D printer and then walk away and trust that it's going to get the job done for you, you're really not gaining anything with that 3D printer. In addition, you've got this skilled, salaried engineer that's having to become a tinkerer just to output a part during your experiment. And then, with a cheap 3D printer, oftentimes you go into it with little or no expectations. We're just going to kind of see how this goes. If it goes somewhere, great. If it doesn't, no big loss on our end. But, in my opinion, or I think most reasonable people's opinion, if you have no expectations for the machine and then you accomplish nothing, it'd be quite easy to say, hey, we tried that 3D printing thing. It didn't work out. We'll revisit it in a decade from now when the technology is where we think it needs to be. And that's really the trap that many fall into. It's, we want to try a 3D printer. You kind of Google around, best 3D printer in the market. You end up with one of those hobbyist machines, and I'm not here to bash them. You can do some really neat stuff with those sort of lower grade hobbyist machines, but you aren't going to accomplish what you can with an industrial grade 3D printer. And then last, you're just going to reach maybe you do have a little bit of success, but you'll reach the limitation of that technology quite quickly. And it's just, I can't afford to buy cheap things personally, so I'd rather just kind of do my homework, figure out how I'm going to use this thing, and then make the right investment. And I want to dive a little bit deeper into that here and compare a couple very different scenarios. One where a manufacturer just goes ahead and purchases that cheap printer to learn on, and one where a well-planned additive manufacturing initiative is taking place where we've gotten into our submarine and are exploring below the tip of that iceberg. So let's talk about setting the wrong tone with a cheap hobbyist 3D printer. And similar to setting the right tone with a Markforged industrial 3D printer, things kind of always start out with a very enthusiastic kind of champion, if you will. Maybe it's a hobbyist user that's done some 3D printing at home, but they're ready to start 3D printing and the future looks promising. So when we set the wrong tone with our cheap 3D printer, we just say, let's just do it. We've got nothing to lose. Maybe we're losing, if you're on the really cheap end, $200 to $500, and if you're just kind of on the cheap end, a couple $1,000, few $1,000. We're not going to go out of business if this thing fails miserably. So they buy the printer and then they say, let's look for some applications for this thing. And what happens as they start 3D printing things, they quickly realize the limitations of the technology and really end up having very limited or even no success with their 3D printer. And I'll tell you what, this doesn't always pan out this way. It varies, but I think in general, this is kind of the most common picture that I see is that their 3D printer ends up in a kind of storage closet or a storage area that doesn't get visited, just idle. And it never ceases to amaze me that every time I visit these individuals or these manufacturers that have these sort of lower grade, cheap 3D printers, they're never being used when you get there. It's, they try and tell me over the phone before I meet them, it's like, yeah, we've found some value in this 3D printer, but for some reason it's never printed when I get there. And I'm always curious why. So let's talk about what setting the right tone with technologies like Markforged looks a little bit better. And it starts the same way. You're kind of excited about bringing in some new technology. We want you to be enthusiastic about it and honestly positive about what it can do for you. But the kind of key difference is we want to be a little bit more strategic about what we're doing here, because there are some larger financial implications involved with purchasing an industrial grade 3D printer. So let's kind of talk about those applications right out of the gate, and let's test a part for you. And that's kind of the way that you are able to know whether your machine's going to be able to do what you want it to do. And we analyze for return on investment. Is this machine going to pay itself off in 3 months? Or is it going to take 6 months? Or is it going to take 10 years? And maybe it's not a good decision to bring in a piece of capital equipment and realize the machine limitations. 3D printing is not the end-all, be-all that's going to solve all of your problems. Even our powerful Markforged technology has its limitations, and we want to be very upfront with you as you're going through this analysis. We've created a pass-fail as we identify these applications, so if it passed the test, it's time to buy your 3D printer. And then afterwards, we want you to go through our additive manufacturing university, our Markforged University training, just like you go through SolidWorks training to get up to speed and proficiently use. We think that you maybe use your 3D printer for a month or two so you have some good questions, and then go through one of our training sessions. And we're confident that you're going to be using your machine around the clock 24/7, and you're going to scale your 3D printers. That's how you set the tone early. And part of this is asking the tough questions. So like I just said, our technology is not the end-all be-all. And don't be surprised if in the end, the answer is that, hey, we can't solve this problem for you, and we don't want you to buy a machine if we can't solve your problem. I was working with a 3D printing interested buyer, a Markforged interested buyer, several months ago, and the conversations all went really well, so we decided to schedule an on-site meeting where we did a walk the line and looked at his organization to help him identify. This particular engineer wanted 3D printing to work so badly, but once we got there and examined what he was doing, the harsh reality was that we couldn't help him. In that particular instance, there was nothing that he was doing that we could add efficiencies that were going to result in return on investment. So we literally had to kind of wash our hands and walk away, as much as it pained me, especially with someone who wanted the technology to work so badly. So, here, how is your company going to use it? It's so broad when you look at how your company can apply industrial grade 3D printing. We can focus on so many different areas: prototyping and production, replacement parts, custom tooling is kind of a low-hanging fruit. And you don't necessarily want to address all of them out of the gate. You may just want to focus on one or two of these areas. But we want to ask the tough questions to you and out of the gate. And we need you to be transparent, because we don't want to go down this path of evaluating the technology if it's just not going to work for you. So now we've zeroed in on an area to focus on. We need to prove that this technology is going to work before you buy a 3D printer. And what are some of the ways that you can do that? Point blank, test the parts. MLC as a service offers benchmark parts. And after we've kind of asked those tough questions, we'll say, hey, shoot us over a part so that we can send you a quote on what it's going to cost for us to 3D print this part for you, send it to you, and let you test it for yourself, so that you know that you are applying our technology somewhere that's going to address the inefficiencies that I spoke of earlier and help you achieve a return on investment in a reasonable amount of time. If you're kind of stuck and don't know where to start, once COVID-19 clears up, we'll start doing walk the lines again, where we can come visit you in person and kind of look around and give you some ideas on where we should look to find applications that are a good fit. And then, again, as part of asking those questions, you may have a great application that makes sense, but still doesn't really give you ROI in a reasonable amount of time. And it just may never make sense for you to buy a 3D printer. But we have some great partners that really, their business hinges on just making these parts for you. And maybe that's the route that you end up going. And we'll put you in touch with those, because we know the people and we work very closely with them. So that sort of concludes my segment on setting the tone early. I want to pass things over to Amelia Parada to kind of tie in the Markforged platform So let's switch things over to Amelia over in Texas. Hey, Amelia.
Thank you, Jordan. To continue this presentation about how or what to know before you buy a 3D printer, I'm going to be discussing the platform in which Markforged created to allow their customers to utilize their products seamlessly. First, we'll discuss a mature system, their software first approach to the product, the scalability with the machines, and finally, unlocking your potential with the product. This platform is essential when looking at Markforged 3D printers. It will help you as a potential customer to learn about the entire package that Markforged has to offer. With a background in composites and a degree in aeronautical engineering, Greg Mark, after a few successful companies he started, was looking into 3D printing as a resource for the Navy. They had a hardware device that they were having a problem manufacturing. So he thought about 3D printing. This is the first time he was exposed to it. However, that 3D printed part was just plastic, so it was weak. This is where his idea and his background came together to provide strong composite 3D printed parts. Obviously, throughout the years and in such a short period of time, the company has constantly matured and grown throughout those years, from 2013 to today in 2020, with much more on the horizon. I illustrated this timeline to depict the fact that although it is only 7 years since the idea of Markforged was born, the trajectory of moving forward as a company is looking to move at the same pace as a consumer. This is dynamic, this is ever changing, and can be drastic at times. And as Markforged has grown, that's what they keep in mind, being dynamic and making those changes with their consumers. So I keep talking about this platform. What is this platform? As a whole, it consists of 3 essential parts that come together and make up Markforged 3D printers. You have your software, your materials, and your printers. This platform brings the power of an agile software, innovative if you will, and 3D printing to the world of industrial manufacturing. Having a singular platform with a software-first approach allows Markforged to continuously innovate into the platform to grow and develop over time. This is a significant advantage. This mature system enables our customers to work and innovate with confidence and ease across a wide range of industrial materials, keeping the customer connected to the innovation and advancements of the materials and software with just one interface. It's really hard pressed to find any other 3D printer in the market that gives you that affordability. One additional factor that we like to talk about with our entire product is Markforged University. Education is important. And with additive manufacturing being a new way to manufacture a part that has been traditionally manufactured a certain way for a long period of time, having that knowledge and that ability to learn is invaluable. This educational option gives customers the ability to learn how to design for additive manufacturing, training the brain to think differently in order for them to properly use the device, materials, and software. Once again, we're enabling our customers to be successful. When you invest with Markforged, we do our best to offer you all the tools to be successful. Markforged is scalable. You can scale the product into a print farm if necessary. This includes data management and wouldn't necessarily require a completely retooling if you start with a different platform. Desktop uses the same software as the industrial, as well as the metal. It all works together. All of this is possible with the fact that Markforged brought 3D printing to the cloud. And with the devices being IoT devices, it helps make a streamlined process when implementing multiple Markforged 3D printers across your manufacturing floor, just like you see in the example there today. Obviously, you see all X7s. That necessarily isn't always the case. We have a number of customers who start out in the desktop Mark II region and develop that need across their organization and grow with their product. The glorious part about that is that when they do implement the Mark II, the X7, and then potentially the Metal X, everything is a seamless process. It's one interface. There are other 3D printer options in the market that don't have this ability. If you implemented a certain technology for said 3D printer company, and then you chose to implement a separate technology, those two interfaces do not talk. The slicing software is not the same. And so, as an organization and wanting to be streamlined across the entire organization, having that hiccup or that break in communication can be a big headache. And that includes the flow of your data management, transitioning from one library to the next, and a lot of that takes away from your ability to produce your product and get your product out to your consumer on demand. So a multiple software environment isn't always necessarily the best thing. This is something that we learned on our SolidWorks side of the business. Something that we implement there, we also try to implement with regards to a single user base, a single interface system. So the platform really gives you that opportunity to do that. Having a turnkey, connected, and reliable platform that simply works helps to unlock the potential of an individual or organization. The software with you, the engineer, and the machines unlocks a number of capabilities. We hear it all the time. I bought the 3D printer for X reason, and I'm not only using it for that, but I'm also using it for X, Y, Z reasons. Our product allows first-time operators to understand the system as they use it, then quickly integrate it into their toolbox, utilizing it across all aspects of their company. The platform and the products as a whole reduce the distance between the user and the solution, removing pain points one might experience with other 3D printers on the market. Now, let's take a deep dive and jump into the material section of the presentation. With so many specialized manufacturing techniques, the materials necessary needs to fit within a multitude of industries. So as you're following this path with us in your pursuit of what to know when buying a 3D printer, the ultimate question is, what are you planning to 3D print? We're going to compare PLA and ABS to Onyx. Then I plan on posing one more question to you. What's more important in the end? What are you planning to 3D print? Let's face it, 3D printing has been around for over 30 years, starting out specifically with rapid prototyping with plastic parts. Remember in my story of how Markforged began? He printed a device for the Navy, but it was plastic, so it wasn't ideal for end use. Well, that's where 3D printing really sat for a long time, in the plastic arena. As the technology advanced throughout the years, we now have multiple use cases you can see here. Our composite materials allow you to 3D print across all use cases and allows the user to create a competitive edge with how they manufacture their products. Faster, cheaper, and with stronger, lighter materials. So you must ask yourself, what are you planning on 3D printing? Because the materials matter the most. That's your end product. That's the reason you purchased this 3D printer. Comparing the three materials isn't really fair because both PLA and ABS has its strengths and its weaknesses. But Onyx picks up where they fall short. PLA, although is weak, is picked for its ease of use. It prints smooth, but not strong. ABS is strong, but it's difficult to print with. It also smells a little bit when you print it, and it's finicky to print with. It tends to warp a lot. It has adhesion problems, you name it. So there's pros and cons with utilizing PLA and ABS. But Onyx is like the two of them, but better. Superior due to strength and ease of use. It prints smooth, it's strong, and its ease of use is something that we hear a lot about. But that's not the only reason that people get into our products. People look at our products because of this right here. Composites. That is our differentiator. This is where we beat a lot of our competitors. Being able to combine our Onyx material with 4 different fibers, giving us strengths of 60-61 aluminum, that's really why people look at our product and our platform. The 4 different fibers that you do have the ability to utilize is the carbon fiber for additional strength, fiberglass, so it's a cheaper but strong option. You have your high strength, high temp fiberglass. That's your cheap, strong, and heat resistant option. And then you've got your Kevlar. And Kevlar is good for impact resistant. So having those different fibers to reinforce, and when I say reinforce, I'm thinking of rebar in a cement structure. So you're not going to see it on an external level. You're just going to know that it's there on an internal level because you were the one that implemented that fiber in that part. So that's our key differentiator in the market. And with us taking a look at all the different materials, there's just one more question I'd like to ask. In the end, what's more important? You have several paths to take when looking at 3D printing and when buying and choosing the option that you want to go with. That is one thing that you have to make sure that you do as a consumer is purchase what's important to you. Knowing all that you know today, I hope you make the right decision that's best for you. But one final thing before we let you go, I'm going to pass along the presentation to my colleague China Penne out of our Washington State office to address some of the common 3D printer hiccups to avoid. China, take it away.
Thanks, Amelia. In the next few slides, I'd like to cover common issues and misconceptions that many interested buyers often face when it comes to their very first 3D printer. I'll go over how to avoid hardware and safety issues, bad quality parts, and ensuring that you're receiving efficient support. Now, when you're looking to buy something, what criteria do you typically look for? Price, cost of ownership, performance, brand loyalty? I'm sure it depends on what you're looking for, so let's take a look at a fictional example and compare the two. Option number 1 is a $75,000 brand new vehicle. It comes from a reputable brand name, it's packed with luxury features, and it has a lower cost of ownership. Option number 2 is a $100,000 vehicle. It's a used 2015 model. It's also a very well-known name, but it does require special training to operate it. Now, which one would you choose? That's an almost impossible decision to make with only that limited amount of information. For most purchases, you have a background on that product so you can properly evaluate them even at a glance. But for 3D printing, you may not yet have that background. You may not know what makes one better or worse, or which one has the features that will fit your specific needs better. Besides, companies don't advertise the negative aspects of their products. They only pitch the positives, so this information just isn't enough to decide. So what are the two products I just described? A 2020 GMC Sierra Denali pickup truck and a 2015 Kenworth dump truck. Now, everyone on this call knows enough about vehicles to know that those two vehicles don't really compete with each other. They're not in the same class, they aren't used for the same things, but they're both technically trucks, so they're capable of hauling sand, pulling a trailer, and carrying passengers. If you're hauling sand for construction or you're pulling a camper with your family, the choice is really obvious, but what about everyone in the middle? When you're in the market for a 3D printer, the choice doesn't always seem so cut and dry as this one. After all, 3D printers aren't understood as well as trucks. And unlike these two printers that don't look all that much different from the outside, they both just look like boxes. So how do you know which one is which? For those of you who know more about trucks than you do about 3D printers, let me just give you a preview of the kinds of things you might deal with or struggle with as a new owner. So you can look at the printers the same way you look at trucks and ask the right questions as you shop around, and you can compare solutions to find something that fits your needs better without some hidden problem that is going to ruin it for your ROI. Now, let's go over some hardware and safety issues to avoid. First things first, trust is super important. You want to be able to walk away and trust that your 3D printer is going to do its job. 24/7 monitoring is a huge common issue that many 3D printer users have to do to make sure that their print doesn't fail and overall make sure that your part is actually being printed. You want to be able to load your file, press start, and come back to a perfectly completed part. I mean, imagine having to sit in front of a 10-hour print or even a 6-hour print. That's time out of your day, and essentially, money is time and time is money. Fortunately for our Markforged users, we're able to walk away from a 24-hour print and trust that the printer will accurately print a high strength and smooth part. That's either overnight or even on the weekend. If for some reason a print is interrupted, the printer will actually send you a snapshot of your part and a description of the issue. Most times it's an easy catch before you actually start your job, but trust is something that Markforged does not break. So next is storage. Many startups or small companies have limitations when it comes to storage. In this picture, you see a large industrial printer that requires a large warehouse environment, but what if you don't have a large space to store your printer in? And also think about transportation. The amount of time and labor to disassemble, pack up, and set up your printer. What if you need to transport your printer to a client for an application demo or even a trade show? Markforged has accessible and easy setup industrial sized and desktop composite 3D printers that's also office friendly. Not only is it easy and accessible, but it's safe. It's so safe that in many cases, a large warehouse isn't even required. Another important factor you need to consider are safety hazards. PPE requirements. Many know about the bad odor from ABS, but not too many know about the hazards with regards to the toxic fumes released from ABS and also PLA. In addition to plastic toxins, metal toxins is also a serious issue that requires multiple protective equipment. Fortunately, as I mentioned before, Markforged designs and manufactures every printer and materials to ensure safety no matter where you are. For example, our experts are actually able to demonstrate our industrial composite printers live at trade shows, events, and these are in front of hundreds of people. And the upside to this is no one needs any protective gear to touch the printers, to even watch the printer, or touch any of our printed parts. As safety protocols are put into place, expect your procedures to be cut in half with Markforged metal and composite 3D printers. Next is heated print beds and bed leveling. Now, for those who aren't familiar with the benefits of heated beds, it's used to make sure that your print sticks to the bed. The surface is heated, and as plastic is extruded from the nozzle, the heated bed allows it to stick. It can also help avoid any warping of your part. However, it does take time to heat up, cool down, and over time, the actual bed can actually deform after continuously being subjected to heat. So, how is this an issue? Time, protective gear, and cost of maintenance and replacement parts, all of which can be avoided with a printer like Markforged that allows you to snap on your bed, lay down glue on the area of your print, launch your print, and easily remove your part without any protective gear. Now, with regards to leveling, the importance of this process is to ensure that the base of your model is printed smoothly and accurately. The first layer is the most critical layer of your print. The image to the left with strands of materials is an example of bad leveling. Warping, nozzle clogging, dislocation, and poor adhesion are other effects that can also occur. The image to the right shows a smooth surface finish, which is actually what you want to see. Oftentimes, bad leveling can occur with manual shim leveling, but fortunately, Markforged offers laser bed leveling for composite series. The laser bed utility on the composite industrial printer allows you to accurately level your print bed with the laser and provides live feedback during the leveling process to ensure that you get the best level possible. Now, you've heard me mention how heated print beds and bed leveling are important when it comes to the quality of your parts. So now I want to briefly go over unknown issues that can cause your part to fail and how to avoid post-processing. First, warping and curling. Now, this can happen when cooling happens quicker at some of the areas of the model than others. For example, the corners of your model might cool faster than the heart of your part. This causes some bending and can add stress to your model. Next is stringing and oozing, which is where the small thin strands of plastic protrude from the model, so it's like hair-like strands. Next is incomplete and messy infill. So when it comes to 3D printing, infill is a very, very important factor to a print strength, structure, and weight. Now, with all of these, many users are having to do what it's called post-processing. However, not all parts can be saved from post-processing, so throwing away the failed part may be your only option. Why are all these important? This can happen based on the printer you own and sometimes the types of material used. There's a reason ABS and PLA parts fail, and there's a reason why Markforged has developed technologies that controls the feeds and speeds and makes all of their own material. The quality control and the single point of accountability means that you're not buying pieces and parts, but you're buying a solution to one problem and one that will continue to improve and scale throughout the life of the product. Last but not least, technical support for both hardware and software, all of which can cause an increase in lead time and sometimes costs when it comes to on site or over the phone technical support, new hardware or material orders, and consumable orders. Especially when you're required to shop around for slicing software and materials through third party vendors. Not all 3D printer manufacturers provide an all in one package, which requires 2 to 3 or even more contacts for support. Luckily, Markforged and MLC CAD Systems are both small yet successful companies that provides both a support ticket system and live engineers. If you're looking for replacement parts or wanting to place an urgent order for support, our specialists are ready to book your order on the very same day. The benefits of having one vendor as your hardware, materials, and software provider can reduce your wait time, cost to outsource support, and it can even benefit your accounting team when managing payables. So, overall, many times interested buyers just aren't aware of the many issues that can occur when it comes to investing in a certain type of printer, or even when it comes to choosing a provider. Saying, I just need a cheap printer for prototypes as long as my parts are good enough, they all print the same. Why should I invest in a high quality printer when they all print the same? Those are all common misconceptions that can be avoided. We definitely don't want this to happen to you. And then later on here, I need to upgrade my printer. I just spent thousands of dollars on maintenance repairs, but only hundreds on my printer. I'm spending way too much time monitoring my prints. These are all things that can be avoided. So let's make sure that you start off right. If you start off with a Markforged printer as your first additive manufacturing purchase, you may never truly know the struggles that plague the early adopters. But that also means that you wouldn't be able to pull off the back in my day line on the young folks. But I'd say that's a fair trade-off. So thank you again, everyone. I'd like to hand the mic back over to Amelia and Jordan to close us out for a Q&A session.
Wonderful job, Trina. Thank you so much. Couple things I want to point out from the presentation today is the YouTube channel. Go subscribe, follow us on YouTube. You're going to get a lot of information, and we update that with constant videos of all of our products as often as we can. Secondly, just to kind of follow up with what China had said about Markforged and MLC CAD Systems providing these services, we're small yet successful companies, and nothing could be more true, with that being the true core of what we are and who we are at MLC CAD Systems with the unbeatable services that we do offer. We want to thank every single one of you for joining the call with us today. We understand that everyone is working from home and we have a little bit more time on our hands to maybe explore other options, and we really do appreciate you taking the time to explore those options with us today. We're going to actually throw up a poll for you to review, kind of asking you where you are in the process at this time. And so feel free to take that poll. We'll assess the answers, and then we're going to jump into a live Q&A with MLC CAD Systems, focusing on providing you the technical aspects that you might be needing, with Kyle and Travis on the line to help out with those. So once again, this is Amelia Parada with MLC CAD Systems, and we greatly appreciate you for taking the time out of your day to join us for this presentation.